For 45 years, my wife Martha told me she was going to the bank every Monday morning just to handle the household bills and organize her coupons. I believed her because I was just a retired structural engineer who trusted his wife implicitly. I handed over my paycheck every week and never asked questions. But standing at her funeral with the rain soaking through my cheap black suit, my son handed me a brochure for a state-run nursing home and told me I had 48 hours to vacate the house I built with my own hands. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a senile old man they could toss aside like garbage. They had no idea that the small silver key Martha left behind would unlock a secret worth $28 million and a plan for revenge that would bring them to their knees. Before I tell you how I destroyed their greed and reclaimed my dignity, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been underestimated by your own family, or if you have ever had to fight for what was yours. My name is Henry Caldwell, and I am 70 years old. I have lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania my entire life. I worked hard, I paid my taxes, and I loved my family with everything I had. But as I stood there in the muddy grass of Allegheny Cemetery, watching the workers lower the mahogany casket into the wet earth, I realized that love is not always a two-way street. The pastor had finished his final prayer. The few friends who had braved the weather were heading back to their cars, murmuring their condolences as they passed me. I stood alone by the open grave, my hands clasping the brim of my hat, waiting. I was waiting for my children to come over. I was waiting for a hand on my shoulder. I was waiting for my son Lucas or my daughter Emily to hug me and tell me that we would get through this together. Instead, I watched them standing 10 yards away under a cluster of large black umbrellas. They weren't crying. They were huddled in a tight circle, whispering. Lucas, my eldest son at 42, kept checking his watch as if he had a train to catch. Emily, my youngest, was busy typing something on her phone, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. And then there was Tanya, my daughter-in-law, Lucas's wife. She was looking right at me, not with sympathy, but with a cold calculation that made me shiver more than the freezing rain. I took a step toward them, my knees sinking in the damp cold. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to sit in my armchair, smell the lingering scent of Martha's lavender perfume, and maybe drink a glass of that wine I had been saving for our golden anniversary. I needed comfort. But before I could even open my mouth to ask for a ride home, Tanya broke away from the group and marched toward me. Her heels sank into the soft ground with every step, but she didn't seem to care. Henry, she said. She didn't call me Dad or Pop, just Henry. We need to talk about the logistics. I looked at her confused. My wife had been in the ground for less than 10 minutes. Logistics. Tanya, I said, my voice rasping from days of silent grief. Can't this wait until we get home? I'm tired. That is exactly the point, she interrupted, cutting me off with a sharp wave of her hand. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was damp from the rain, but I could clearly see the logo. It was a brochure for Shady Pines, a budget-assisted living facility on the outskirts of the city, a place known for smelling of bleach and despair. What is this? I asked, my hands trembling as I took the paper. It is a brochure for your new arrangements, Tanya said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Look, Henry, we have to be realistic here. You are 70 years old. Your pension is peanuts. It barely covers your medication, let alone the heating bill for that big, drafty house. Martha was the one who managed the money. Martha was the one who kept things running. Without her, you are going to be destitute in 3 months. I felt the blood rushing to my face. I stared at Lucas, who was now standing behind his wife, looking down at his shoes. Lucas, I said, looking for my son. What is she talking about? That is my house. I built the deck with my own hands. I paid the mortgage for 30 years. Lucas finally looked up, but his eyes slid away from mine. He looked weak. He always looked weak when Tanya was around. Dad, he mumbled. It's complicated. The house, well, the deed was in Mom's name. You know that. And 6 months ago, when she got really sick, she signed a power of attorney and transferred the title to us, to the estate. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I tried to process his words. Martha had transferred the house without telling me no. That was impossible. We were partners. We did it to protect the asset, Tanya interjected, stepping between me and my son. If you got sick, the government would take the house to pay for your care. We saved it. But now with Martha gone, we have to liquidate. We have expenses, Henry. Lucas has business debts. Emily needs money for her kids' tuition. We can't afford to let you sit alone in a 4-bedroom house eating up our inheritance. Our inheritance. The words hung in the cold air. They weren't talking about my home. They were talking about their payday. We have already contacted a real estate agent, Tanya continued, checking her manicured nails. She is coming on Monday morning to take photos for the listing. That gives you 48 hours to pack your personal effects. We will hire a crew to clear out the rest of the junk next week. Junk, I whispered. You mean our life, you mean your mother's things. It is just stuff, Henry, Tanya snapped. Don't be dramatic. We found a room at Shady Pines that fits your budget. It is semi-private, so you will have a roommate, which is good for socialization. The truck comes Sunday night to take you there. It is all arranged. I looked at Emily. She was still on her phone, pretending none of this was happening. I looked at Lucas. He looked like he wanted to vanish. And I looked at Tanya, who was smiling that tight, victorious smile I had come to hate over the years. You can't do this, I said, gripping the wet brochure until it tore. I am your father. I am your grandfather. You can't just throw me out on the street. We aren't throwing you on the street. Tanya sighed as if explaining something simple to a child. We are putting you in a home. It is safe. It is responsible. And frankly, Henry, it is what Martha would have wanted. She wouldn't want you to be a burden on us. That was the line that broke something inside me. A burden. For 45 years I worked overtime. I drove used cars so they could have new ones. I skipped vacations so they could go to camp. I gave them everything. And now, standing over my wife's grave, they were discarding me like a piece of broken furniture. I straightened my back. The pain in my knees was still there, but a cold fire was starting to burn in my chest. I looked Tanya dead in the eye. You are giving me 48 hours, I asked quietly. Yes, she said. Sunday night. Be ready. She turned on her heel and started walking back to their car. Lucas mumbled a quick, sorry, Dad, and followed her like a trained puppy. Emily didn't even say goodbye. She just got in the back seat of Lucas's car and slammed the door. I stood there in the rain for a long time. I watched their taillights fade into the mist. I looked down at the fresh dirt covering my Martha. I had never felt so alone, so small, so betrayed in my entire life. I was 70 years old. I had less than $2,000 in my checking account. I had no home. I had no family. But as I turned to walk toward my old rusted sedan, I remembered something. I remembered the way Martha used to look at me when I worried about money. I remembered her strange little habit of locking her desk drawer every time she left the room. And I remembered the calendar in the kitchen, where every Monday, for as long as I could remember, she had written the same 3 words. Bank, 9 a.m. I wiped the rain from my face. They thought I was finished. They thought I was just an old man they could bully. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to Shady Pines. I was going home. And I was going to find out exactly what my wife had been doing every Monday for 45 years. Because if I knew Martha, she didn't leave me defenseless. She left me a map. And I was going to follow it even if it led me straight to hell. The drive back from the cemetery felt like the longest journey of my life. I navigated my rusted sedan through the rain-slicked streets of Pittsburgh, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Every turn brought me closer to a house that was supposed to be my sanctuary, but now felt like a battleground. I pulled into the driveway, and my stomach dropped. The front door was wide open. It was gaping like a wound exposing the sanctity of my home to the cold, damp air. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the roof, trying to gather the strength to walk through that door. I knew what was waiting for me inside, but knowing did not make it any easier. I stepped out of the car and walked up the path I had paved with my own hands 20 years ago. The sound of voices drifted out from the open door. They were loud, casual, devoid of any reverence for the day. I stepped over the threshold, and the sight that greeted me stole the breath from my lungs. My living room, the place where Martha and I had watched our children grow up, looked like a flea market. Cabinet doors were thrown wide open. Drawers were pulled out and dumped onto the floor. My children were not mourning. They were shopping. I walked further in, water dripping from my coat onto the hardwood floor. Emily was on her knees in front of the display cabinet. She had a large canvas tote bag open next to her, and she was systematically clearing out the shelves. I watched her hand wrap around the silver tea set. That set belonged to Martha's grandmother. It was the pride of her collection, something she only brought out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Emily was shoving the pieces into the bag, with no care, clinking metal against metal. "Emily?" I said, my voice rough. "What are you doing? Put that back." She didn't even flinch. She didn't look at me. She just kept grabbing the silver forks and spoons. "I am taking these for safekeeping, Dad," she said, her tone dismissive. "Mom promised them to me years ago. Besides, you don't use them. They will just tarnish if they stay here. I need to get them appraised. The market for silver is good right now." Appraised. She was selling her mother's heirlooms before the funeral flowers had even wilted. I wanted to scream, but a sound from the kitchen made me spin around. A distinct pop of a cork. I rushed into the kitchen and saw Lucas leaning against the counter. He was holding a bottle of wine. My heart seized in my chest. It wasn't just any bottle. It was the vintage Bordeaux I had bought 30 years ago. I had stored it in the coolest part of the basement, turning it, religiously saving it for our golden anniversary. It was the symbol of our endurance. And there was Lucas pouring the deep red liquid into a chipped coffee mug as if it were cheap soda. "Lucas, no!" I shouted, moving faster than my old legs should have allowed. "That is not for you. That was for your mother and me." Lucas took a long swig from the mug and grimaced. He looked at me with glazed, indifferent eyes. "Relax, Dad," he said, wiping his mouth. "It is vinegar anyway. You waited too long to open it. It is spoiled. Just like everything else in this house. It is all old junk." I reached out and snatched the bottle from his hand, spilling wine onto the linoleum. It looked like blood. "Get out," I yelled, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in decades. "Both of you, get out of my house. These are my things. This is my wife's home. You have no right to touch a single thing." Slow clapping started from the hallway behind me. I turned to see Tanya standing there. She looked immaculate in her black designer dress, untouched by the rain or the grief. She was holding Martha's jewelry box, the one I had carved from mahogany for her 10th birthday. She looked at me with a smirk that chilled me to the bone. "Oh, Henry," she said, shaking her head, as if scolding a child. "You really are confused, aren't you?" She walked into the kitchen, the click of her heels sharp against the floor. She placed the jewelry box on the table and crossed her arms. "You keep saying my house and my things," Tanya said. "But let us look at the reality. You were a structural engineer, sure. But you retired 15 years ago. Your pension is pathetic. It barely covers the heating bill." I stared at her, the empty wine bottle heavy in my hand. "I worked for 40 years, I said, my voice low. "I gave everything to this family." "Exactly," Tanya interrupted. "You gave everything. Specifically, you gave every single paycheck to Martha. You handed it over because you didn't want to deal with the finances. You trusted her completely. You never put your name on the investment accounts. You never checked the deed transfers. You let her handle the business while you played the simple, happy husband." She took a step closer, her perfume overpowering the smell of the spilled wine. Martha was the one who managed the economy of this family, Henry. And now that she is gone, the assets belong to the estate, which means they belong to the heirs. Lucas and Emily. Not you. You are a dependent, Henry. You have been living off her management for years. We are just liquidating our inheritance before you waste it all on medical bills or sentimental nonsense. I looked at Lucas. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just poured more wine into his mug. I looked at Emily in the other room, who was now taking the paintings off the walls. I realized then that I was completely alone. I had trusted my wife with everything, believing that our partnership was absolute. I never imagined I would need to protect myself from the fruit of my own loins. They stripped me of my dignity in my own kitchen. They made me feel small, foolish, and powerless. I was not the patriarch. I was an obstacle. I couldn't breathe. The air in the house felt thick with greed. I couldn't fight them physically. I couldn't argue with their twisted logic, not when I was paralyzed by grief. I needed to escape. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the kitchen, past the living room where my life was being packed into cardboard boxes. I walked down the hallway to the end, to the one room they hadn't violated yet. Martha's sewing room and office. I stepped inside and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the brass lock, hearing the click that separated me from the vultures outside. The room was dark and quiet. It smelled of lavender and old paper. I leaned back against the door and slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I sat there in the dark, listening to them rummage through my life, realizing that the woman I loved was gone, and the family I built was an illusion. I was a prisoner in the house I had paid for with my sweat and blood. But as I sat there, my hand brushed against the pocket of my jacket, feeling the cold metal of the key I had found earlier. They thought I was finished. They thought I was just a poor old man. They had no idea what Monday morning would bring. I sat on the floor of Martha's sewing room for what felt like hours. The noise from the rest of the house had finally died down. My children and my daughter-in-law had left, taking with them the silver, the wine, and my dignity, leaving behind only the echo of their cruelty and the threat of my eviction. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the relentless rhythm of the rain against the window pane. I pulled myself up, my joints protesting with every movement. I couldn't just sit here and wait for the movers to drag me to a nursing home. I needed ammunition. I needed proof. I turned on the small brass desk lamp. The pool of yellow light illuminated Martha's sanctuary. This room was the one place in the house that was entirely hers. It was where she mended my work shirts, where she balanced the checkbook, and where she spent hours organizing the life I took for granted. I walked over to the gray metal filing cabinet in the corner. If there was a deed, a title, or a document that proved my ownership of this house, it had to be here. I pulled open the top drawer. It groaned on its tracks. Inside, everything was meticulously labeled in Martha's neat cursive script. Utilities, insurance, medical, taxes. I started pulling files, my hands shaking as I flipped through pages of receipts and statements. I found the electric bills going back 10 years. I found the warranty for the water heater we replaced in 2015. I found every single tax return we had filed since 1980. But as I dug deeper, a cold realization began to settle in my stomach. I couldn't find the deed. I couldn't find the mortgage discharge papers. I found the property tax records, but when I looked closely at the most recent one, my breath caught in my throat. The name listed on the owner line wasn't Henry and Martha Caldwell. It was the Martha Caldwell Revocable Trust. The date of the transfer was 6 months ago. Tanya hadn't been lying. My wife, the woman I trusted with my life, had signed away our home without saying a word to me. "Why, Martha?" I whispered to the empty room. "Why did you do this?" I slammed the drawer shut, the metallic clang ringing in my ears. I felt a surge of betrayal so sharp it nearly brought me to my knees. Was I truly just a dependent to her? Did she think I was too incompetent to handle our affairs? I turned away from the cabinet, my eyes scanning the room for anything else, any clue that would make sense of this madness. My gaze landed on the bookshelf above her sewing table. Lined up perfectly were dozens of small, leather-bound pocket calendars. Martha never used a smartphone or a computer to track her days. She wrote everything down. I reached up and pulled down the volume from this year. I opened it to the current week. It was blank except for the date of her death, which she obviously hadn't planned. I flipped back a few months. Doctor appointment. Grocery. Church committee. Normal mundane entries. I pulled down the calendar from the previous year, then the one from 5 years ago, then 10. I started laying them out on the sewing table, opening them to random months. I was looking for a pattern, though I didn't know what it was. And then I saw it. It started in 1979. On the first Monday of January in blue ink, she had written 3 words, 9 a.m., meet P. I checked the next Monday, 9 a.m., meet P. I checked a Monday in July of 1985, 9 a.m., meet P. I checked a Monday in October of 1999, 9 a.m., meet P. I frantically opened every single planner, my heart racing faster with each page I turned. Every single Monday, for 45 years, Martha had an appointment at 9 in the morning with someone named P. She never missed a week. Not when the kids were sick. Not when it snowed. Not even on holidays, though. On those days, the entry was moved to Tuesday. Who was P? A dark, poisonous thought entered my mind. Was it a man? Was it a lover? I tried to push the thought away, but the consistency was terrifying. I closed my eyes and tried to remember our Mondays. For as long as I could recall, Monday mornings were sacred to Martha. She would get up early, dressed in her nice Sunday clothes, and tell me she was going to the market or to meet a friend for coffee. I remembered a specific Monday in 1992. I had the day off work because of a sight injury. I asked her if I could come with her, maybe grab breakfast together. I remembered the way she stiffened. She had smiled, patted my cheek, and said, "Oh, Henry, you would be bored to tears. It is just errands. You stay here and rest your back." She never let me come. Not once in 45 years. I looked at the wall of calendars. This wasn't a grocery run. You don't schedule groceries for 9 a.m. sharp for 4 decades. This was a secret life. I sat down at her sewing table, feeling the weight of 45 years of potential deception crushing me. My hand brushed against the underside of the table surface. It was an antique Singer base, heavy cast iron and solid oak. Martha loved this table. She spent more time here than anywhere else. My fingers grazed something uneven on the wood beneath the drawer. I frowned and ducked my head to look under the table. The wood was smooth, but there was a seam that didn't look right. It looked like a panel. I pressed on it, but it didn't budge. I ran my fingers along the edge until I felt a small indentation, a latch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed a letter opener from her pencil cup and wedged it into the seam. I shouldn't be doing this. This was her private space. But she was gone, and she had left me in a burning house with no exit. I needed to know who P was. I needed to know if my entire marriage had been a lie. I pushed the letter opener hard. There was a sharp crack of splintering wood, and a small, shallow drawer dropped down from the underside of the table. It was a hidden compartment. My breath hitched. Inside the compartment there was no money. There were no love letters. There was only one object resting on a bed of velvet lining. It was a key. I reached out and picked it up. It was heavy, made of old tarnished brass, cold to the touch. It wasn't a house key or a car key. It was long, with complex teeth and a rounded head. Stamped into the metal on one side was the number 404. On the other side was a logo I recognized instantly, though it was worn down by years of handling. It was the logo of First City Bank, the oldest bank in Pittsburgh. I stared at the key, my mind racing to connect the dots. First City Bank, Box 404, 9 a.m. Meet PP wasn't a person. P was a place, or a person, at a place. Paxson. Mr. Paxson was the branch manager at First City. He had been there since I was a young man. Martha wasn't meeting a lover. She was going to the bank. But why? We had a joint checking account at a different bank, a small credit union near my old job. We never banked at First City. Why would she go there every week? Why would she hide the key in a secret compartment under her sewing table? And why, for the love of God, did she never tell me? I gripped the key so hard the edges dug into my palm. This key was the answer. It had to be. It was the only thing she had hidden. The calendars were the map, and this key was the destination. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 in the morning. The bank wouldn't open for another 6 hours. 6 hours of agonizing waiting. 6 hours of wondering if I was about to discover a fortune or a debt that would bury me. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, wet street. My car was still there, parked where I left it. The house was quiet now, stripped of its treasures, hollowed out by my children's greed. But in my hand I held a piece of metal that felt like hope. Or perhaps it was a weapon. Martha didn't do things without a reason. She was the most practical woman I had ever known. She wouldn't hide a key for 45 years unless it opened something that mattered. I thought about Tanya's smirk. I thought about Lucas pouring my wine down his throat. I thought about the brochure for the nursing home. They thought the story was over. They thought they had won. I squeezed the brass key in my fist. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to shower, shave, and put on my best suit, the one I wore to the funeral. And at 9 a.m. sharp, just like my wife had done for nearly half a century, I was going to meet P. If there was a secret in box 404, I was going to find it. And if that secret gave me even a sliver of power, a fraction of leverage, I was going to use it. My grief was slowly being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "You left me a trail, Martha," I whispered to the rain-streaked glass. "I am going to follow it, and God help anyone who tries to stop me." I turned off the lamp, leaving the room in darkness, but for the first time since she died, I didn't feel lost. I had a mission. The sun would rise soon, and with it the truth. I walked out of the room, locking the door behind me, the brass key burning a hole in my pocket, waiting for Monday morning. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The rain hadn't stopped since the funeral, turning the city into a gray, weeping landscape. I stood outside the heavy glass doors of First City Bank, smoothing down the lapels of my black suit. It was the same suit I had worn to bury my wife 3 days ago, and frankly, it was the only suit I owned that still fit. It smelled faintly of mothballs and damp wool, a scent that seemed to cling to me like a second skin. I caught my reflection in the polished glass. I looked terrible. My eyes were rimmed with red, sunken deep into a face etched with 70 years of hard work and recent grief. My white hair was combed, but the wind had already messed it up. I didn't look like a man coming to handle serious business. I looked like a man coming to ask for a loan extension, or perhaps just to get out of the rain. I looked like exactly what Tanya said I was. A burden, a relic. I took a deep breath, clutching the cold brass key in my pocket so hard it hurt. This was it. The end of the trail Martha had left me. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the lobby. The bank was cavernous, smelling of floor wax and money. High ceilings, marble floors, and the quiet hum of commerce. It was intimidating. A security guard standing near the entrance took one look at me and took a half step forward. He was young, built like a linebacker with a headset and a look of practiced suspicion. His eyes raked over my scuffed shoes and my frayed cuffs. I could see him making the calculation. Is this guy a vagrant? Is he going to cause trouble? I straightened my spine and walked past him, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. I headed straight for the teller line. It was empty, thankfully. I approached the window where a young woman with perfectly straightened hair and a name tag that read, Jessica, was typing on her computer. She didn't look up immediately. She let me stand there for a good 10 seconds, a subtle power play I had seen 1,000 times. "Can I help you, sir?" She finally asked, her voice tight and professional, but her eyes never left her screen. I cleared my throat. "Good morning. I am here about a safe deposit box." Jessica finally looked at me. Her gaze flickered over my appearance with the same dismissal as the guard. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I have a key." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key. I placed it on the cold marble counter. The sound was a dull thud that seemed too loud in the quiet bank. Jessica sighed, clearly annoyed. "Sir, for box access you need to see a service representative, and they are fully booked until—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes had landed on the key. She stared at it. Then she leaned closer, her perfect composure cracking just a little. She reached out a finger and touched the number stamped into the metal. 404. Then she looked at the old worn logo on the head of the key. Her face went pale. The annoyance vanished, replaced by something that looked a lot like alarm. She looked up at me, really looked at me this time, searching my face. "What is your name, sir?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Henry," I said. "Henry Caldwell." She typed my name into her computer with rapid, jerky movements. A moment later, she stopped. Her hand went to the phone on her desk. She didn't dial a 4-digit extension like they usually do. She pressed a single red button on the console. "Please wait here, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Do not leave." She picked up the receiver and spoke into it. Her hand cupped around the mouthpiece so I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I saw her eyes darting back to me every few seconds. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was it. This was the bad news. Martha had left a debt. A massive, insurmountable debt that required immediate security intervention. Or maybe the box was flagged for something illegal. Maybe she had been involved in something I couldn't even imagine. Panic started to rise in my throat, tasting like bile. I imagined the police coming through those doors. I imagined Tanya's face when she found out I had been arrested at the bank. I imagined losing not just the house but my freedom. I looked around, half tempted to grab the key and run. But my legs felt like lead. I was frozen. Then I heard the sound of footsteps. Fast, heavy footsteps coming from the direction of the executive offices at the back of the bank. I turned and saw a man rushing toward me. He wasn't security. He was older, perhaps 65, wearing an immaculate navy suit that probably cost more than my car. He had silver hair and an air of authority that commanded the room. People stopped what they were doing to watch him. He was practically running across the marble floor, ignoring the other customers, ignoring the staff. He was heading straight for me. I braced myself. I prepared for the accusation. I prepared to be escorted out. "Mr. Caldwell," the man boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. He stopped in front of me, slightly out of breath. He looked at my face, studying it with an intensity that made me want to shrink away. Then his expression softened. A look of profound sadness and recognition washed over his features. "Mr. Caldwell," he repeated, softer this time. "I am Charles Paxson, the branch manager." Paxson, P. The man from the calendar. Before I could say a word, this stranger, this powerful banker, did something that shocked the entire lobby. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me in a tight, genuine embrace. He hugged me like a long-lost brother. I stood there stiff and bewildered, my arms pinned to my sides, smelling his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of old paper. "We have been waiting for you, Henry," he whispered near my ear. "Martha told me you would come. She said you would be here the first Monday after she passed." He pulled back and held me by the shoulders, looking me in the eye. His own eyes were glistening. "I am so incredibly sorry for your loss," he said. "She was a remarkable woman. Truly remarkable." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I was too stunned. The teller, Jessica, was staring at us with her mouth slightly open. The security guard had lowered his stance, looking confused. "Mr. Paxson," I finally managed to croak, "I found this key. I don't know what it is for. I don't know if she owes you money or—" Paxson let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Owe us money, oh, Henry." "No, come with me, please." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the teller. "Jessica, close your station. Bring the key." He put a hand on my back, gentle but firm, guiding me away from the public counter. He led me toward a set of double oak doors that were usually guarded by a keypad and a camera. As we approached, he swiped his own badge, and the doors clicked open. We walked through, leaving the noise of the lobby behind. The air back here was different, cooler, quieter. We walked down a plush carpeted hallway lined with oil paintings of serious-looking men from the 19th century. Employees in glass-walled offices looked up as we passed, their eyes widening when they saw the branch manager escorting a man in a shabby funeral suit. "Where are we going?" I asked, my anxiety spiking again. "To the vault," Henry Paxson said. "To the private vault. Not the one downstairs for the public. The one for our legacy clients." Legacy clients. The words meant nothing to me. I was a man who clipped coupons for canned soup. I wasn't a legacy client. We reached a heavy steel door at the end of the hall. Paxson placed his hand on a biometric scanner. A green light flashed and the heavy tumblers shifted with a deep resonant clank. He pulled the door open and ushered me inside. It was a small room lined floor to ceiling with stainless steel boxes of various sizes. In the center was a solitary wooden table with 2 chairs and a lamp. It felt like a confessional, or an interrogation room. Paxson walked to a specific section of the wall. He scanned the numbers: 401, 402, 403. He stopped at 404. It was a large box, much larger than the standard ones. He turned to me. "Do you have the key, Henry?" I realized Jessica must have handed it back to me in the confusion, or perhaps Paxson had taken it. No, it was in my hand. I had never let go of it. I handed it to him. My hand was shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Paxson took a key from his own pocket, a master key. He inserted both into the 2 locks on the box. He turned them simultaneously. Click. He pulled the long metal drawer out of the wall. It was heavy. I could see the strain in his arms as he carried it over to the table and set it down with a solid thud. He gestured to the chair. "Sit down, Henry." I sat. I stared at the gray metal box. It looked like a coffin for secrets. "Mr. Paxson," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, just tell me." "Is it bad? Did she do something wrong?" Paxson looked at me with a mixture of pity and admiration. "Wrong, Henry. Your wife was the most disciplined, intelligent, and visionary person I have ever banked with. For 45 years, she came here every Monday. She sat in my office. We drank tea. And she built an empire." Empire, I repeated the word, but it made no sense. Paxson reached out and flipped the lid of the box open. I braced myself for the worst. But when I looked inside, I didn't see piles of cash. I didn't see stolen jewelry. I saw paper. Stacks and stacks of thick cream-colored paper with watermarks and gold seals. Certificates, deeds, bonds. I reached in and picked up the top document. It was a stock certificate for a technology company I recognized immediately. A company that had started in a garage in the 80s and now ruled the world. The date on the certificate was 1984. The number of shares was staggering. I picked up another. A deed to a commercial building in downtown Pittsburgh. Another deed for an apartment complex in Shadyside. I looked up at Paxson, my vision blurring. "What is this?" This Paxson said softly, "is what she did with the $50 a week you gave her. She didn't just save it, Henry. She invested it. She played the long game. She bought when everyone was selling. She held when everyone was panicking. She built this for you. For me, for us," he corrected. "But mostly for you. She knew you worried about money. She knew you carried the weight of the family on your shoulders. She wanted to make sure that when the time came, you would never have to worry again. I looked back at the box. It was full. It was overflowing. How much, I asked the question, escaping my lips before I could stop it. Paxson took a breath. We did a valuation last week as per her instructions when she knew the end was coming. The current value of the portfolio, including the real estate holdings and the diversified stock, is approximately $28 million. The room spun. The silence of the vault roared in my ears. $28 million. I was a man being evicted by his children because he couldn't afford a nursing home. And sitting on this table was enough money to buy the nursing home and burn it down. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the papers, feeling the tears hot and fast tracking down my cheeks. My wife wasn't just a housewife. She was a titan. And she had hidden it all, lived a humble life, worn old coats, and cooked simple meals, all to build this. But why didn't she tell me? Because she knew, Paxson said, answering the question I hadn't asked. She knew your children, and she knew that if they knew about the money, they would destroy you to get it. She protected you, Henry, until the very end. He reached into the box again and pulled out something else, a small black leather notebook. And she left you this, he said. She called it her black ledger. She said you would need it for what comes next. I took the book. It felt heavy in my hand. I opened the cover. On the first page, in Martha's familiar steady handwriting, were the words, "For Henry, use this when they show you who they really are." I ran my thumb over the ink. I thought of Tanya's face at the cemetery. I thought of the empty shelves in my living room. Martha knew. She knew exactly what they would do, and she had armed me. I looked up at Paxson. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. In their place was something cold and hard and powerful. "Mr. Paxson," I said, closing the book, "I think I need to speak to a lawyer." Paxson smiled, a shark-like grin that told me he was on my side. "I have the best estate attorney in the state waiting in my office, Henry. Shall we go meet him?" I stood up, smoothing my old suit. I didn't feel like a beggar anymore. I felt like the man my wife knew I could be. "Lead the way," I said. The heavy steel door of the private viewing room clicked shut behind us, sealing out the rest of the world with a finality that made my ears pop. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with the scent of old dust and polished metal. Paxson placed the long gray metal box on the mahogany table. It sat there like a monolith, cold and uninviting. I stared at it, my hands gripping the armrests of the leather chair so hard that my knuckles turned white. I was terrified. Part of me still expected to see a mountain of unpaid bills, gambling debts, or perhaps letters from a secret family that would destroy the memory of the woman I loved. Paxson stood on the other side of the table, his expression solemn but kind. He didn't rush me. He waited until I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then, with a respectful slowness, he reached out and lifted the lid of box 404. I leaned forward, bracing myself for the worst. But there were no stacks of cash. There were no diamonds or gold bars. There were no bundles of angry letters stamped with red overdue notices. Instead, the box was filled to the brim with paper. Thick, cream-colored envelopes bound stacks of documents, with raised seals and files organized with the same meticulous care Martha had applied to her recipe box. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice sounding thin in the quiet room. Paxson reached in and pulled out the first stack. He laid it gently in front of me. "It is history, Henry," he said softly. "It is the history of the last 45 years. I reached out and touched the top document. The paper felt heavy and expensive. It was a stock certificate. I recognized the name of the company immediately. It was a local steel mill, one of the giants that had built Pittsburgh. But the date on the certificate was from 1976. I looked at another. An oil company in Texas. Then another. A technology firm from California that started in a garage in the 80s. I looked up at Pax in confusion clouding my mind. I don't understand. We didn't have money for stocks. We lived paycheck to paycheck. I gave her my check every week and she gave me $50 for gas and lunch. That was it. Paxson smiled, a genuine look of admiration in his eyes. Henry, do you remember that $50 a week you handed her for the household surplus? The money you told her to keep for a rainy day? Nodded slowly. Yes. I thought she used it for groceries. Or for the kids' clothes. She didn't, Paxson said. She stretched the rest of your paycheck to cover the bills. She clipped coupons. She mended clothes. She made meals out of nothing. And that $50 every single Monday morning, she walked into my office and deposited it. But she didn't leave it in a savings account to rot with inflation. She invested it. He gestured to the pile of papers. She bought steel when everyone said the industry was dying. She bought tech stocks when people said computers were just a fad. She bought land on the outskirts of the city when it was just dirt and weeds years before the developers came calling. She had an instinct, Henry. A vision I have never seen in a professional broker, let alone a housewife from the suburbs. She didn't spend a dime. She reinvested every dividend. She let the compound interest work its magic for 4.5 decades. I looked back down at the papers. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. I picked up a deed to a commercial complex downtown. I picked up a statement from a mutual fund that had grown exponentially. So this is worth what, a few $100,000, I asked, trying to wrap my head around the scale of it. That would be enough to save the house. That would be enough to keep me out of the nursing home. Paxson took a deep breath. He walked around the table and stood next to me. Henry, we ran the valuation last week, just before she passed. She wanted an up-to-date figure for you. He placed a single sheet of paper on top of the pile. There was a number printed at the bottom in bold black ink. I stared at it. I blinked, sure that my old eyes were failing me. I counted the commas. I counted the zeros. $28,450,000. The room seemed to tilt. The air grew thin. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I was frozen, trapped in a moment of absolute cognitive dissonance. $28 million. I was a man who had worn the same winter coat for 12 years. I was a man who was currently being evicted by his own son because I couldn't afford the property taxes on a modest 3-bedroom house. I was a man who had felt like a failure, a burden, a parasite living off his wife's management. And all this time I was a millionaire. I am not a burden, I whispered, the realization hitting me harder than the grief. No, Henry, Paxson said firmly. You were the engine. You earned the capital. You worked the long hours in the cold and the rain. You broke your back on those bridges. Martha always said that. She said she was just the steward. You were the source. She took your sweat, and she turned it into an empire. She did this for you. I felt a tear, hot and heavy, roll down my cheek. Then another. And then I broke. I buried my face in my hands and I wept. I didn't cry for the money. I didn't cry for the luxury I had missed or the vacations we never took. I cried for her. I cried for the woman who had loved me enough to deny herself everything so that I would never have to be afraid. She had worn old shoes so I could have this security. She had let our children think we were poor so they wouldn't become spoiled, though God knows that didn't work out as she planned. She had carried this secret alone for 45 years. She had walked into this bank every Monday, played the game of high finance, and then went home to cook pot roast and listen to me complain about the cost of heating oil. She was a giant. And I had never truly known her. I sat there for a long time, letting the tears wash away the shame of the last few days. I wasn't a senile old man. I wasn't a charity case. I was the husband of Martha Caldwell, and together we had conquered the world without anyone knowing. Eventually, the tears subsided. I wiped my face with a rough handkerchief. I looked at the box again. It wasn't just paper. It was armor. It was a weapon. "Is that all of it?" I asked, my voice steadying. "Not quite," Paxson said. He reached into the very back of the metal box and pulled out a small black leather notebook. It was worn at the edges, the binding cracked from use. It looked like a simple diary, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $1. "She wanted you to see the assets first," Paxson said, handing me the book. "But she said this was more important. She called it her black ledger." I took the book. It felt heavy, heavier than the millions in stock certificates. "What is inside?" I asked. "The truth," Paxson replied, his face darkening slightly. "Martha didn't just track the markets, Henry. She tracked everything. She knew your children better than they knew themselves. And she knew that one day you would need to see them clearly without the veil of a father's love." I opened the cover. The first page was written in Martha's familiar, steady script. It was dated 20 years ago. It began with a name, Lucas, and next to it a sum of money. And next to that, a reason. My heart went cold as I read the first entry. I turned the page, then the next. It wasn't a diary. It was a record of debts, a record of sins. I looked up at Paxson. The grief was receding, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "She knew," I said. "She knew what they were." "She knew," Paxson agreed. "And she gave you the means to deal with them." I closed the black book and placed it on top of the millions. I stood up. The old man who walked into this bank 30 minutes ago was dead. He died in this vault. The man standing here now was someone else entirely. "Mr. Paxson," I said, "I think I need to make a withdrawal, and then I need to see a lawyer." Paxson smiled, a shark-like grin that told me the real game was just beginning. "I have the best estate attorney in the city, waiting in conference room B, Henry. He has been on retainer for this moment for 5 years." I smoothed down my jacket. I picked up the black ledger. "Let's go," I said. "I have a family reunion to plan." Paxson led me out of the vault and into his private office on the top floor. It was a space of quiet luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray, weeping city of Pittsburgh. He poured me a glass of water from a crystal carafe, but I didn't drink it. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, the black notebook resting on my knees like a heavy stone. Paxson sat behind his desk, watching me with that same patient, knowing expression. He didn't push me to open it. He knew that what I was about to read would change the way I looked at my family forever. I took a deep breath and opened the cover. The first page was dated October 14th, 2010. I remembered that year. It was a hard year. The economy was down and Lucas had just started his own contracting business. I remembered him coming to us pale and shaking, saying he had been in a fender bender and needed help with the insurance deductible. I remembered giving him $500 from my secret stash in the garage, thinking I was saving the day. I looked at the entry in Martha's handwriting. It didn't say insurance deductible. It said settlement. October 14th, 2010. Lucas. DUI hit and run. Victim agreed to settle out of court. Paid $200,000 to silence witness and cover medical bills. Wire transfer to attorney account. I stared at the numbers. $200,000. My son hadn't just scraped a bumper. He had hurt someone. He had been drunk. And he had come to his mother not for forgiveness, but for a bailout. And she had paid it. She had quietly, efficiently paid a fortune to keep him out of jail, all while cooking dinner and asking me how my day was. I turned the page, my fingers numb. There were more entries for Lucas. Failed business loans she paid off. Credit card debts cleared. But then I saw Emily's name. Emily. August 2015. I remembered that summer. Emily was crying on the porch, saying her boyfriend, a man I never liked, had lost his job and they were going to be evicted. I remembered feeling helpless because I couldn't do more than buy them groceries. The ledger told a different story. Emily. Gambling debts incurred by partner. Threats of violence against them. Paid $150,000 to private lender to ensure safety. $150,000 to pay off a bookie. My daughter, the one who was currently stuffing her mother's silver into a tote bag, had been saved from loan sharks by the very woman she was now robbing. I felt a wave of nausea. I flipped through the pages faster now. I saw Tanya's name. Tanya, the successful executive, the one who looked down on me with such disdain. Tanya. March 2018. Corporate embezzlement accusation. Paid $50,000 to internal audit team member to suppress evidence and facilitate resignation without charges. Paid headhunter $20,000 to secure position at new firm. It was all there. Every success they claimed was bought. Every disaster they avoided was paid for. My wife hadn't just invested in stocks. She had invested in keeping our children out of prison and out of the gutter. She had been the dam holding back the flood of their own incompetence and immorality. I looked up at Paxson. The room felt freezing cold. She knew I whispered. She knew everything. She did, Paxson said, his voice grave. She told me once that she realized early on that her children lacked your moral compass, Henry. She said they inherited her ambition, but none of your integrity. She knew that if she didn't clean up their messes, they would drag you down with them. She paid their debts to protect you, not them. She wanted you to retire in peace, not spend your golden years visiting your son in the county jail. I looked back at the book. It was a catalog of failures. My children were not just greedy. They were broken. And they had drained their mother for years, likely never knowing the true extent of her wealth. Just knowing that if they pushed hard enough, the money would appear. But why hide it from me, I asked, the hurt piercing through the anger. Why let me think we were scraping by? Because she knew you, Henry, Paxson said. You are a man of principle. If you knew Lucas had driven drunk and hurt someone, you would have made him turn himself in. If you knew Tanya had stolen money, you would have insisted she face the consequences. Martha loved you for that, but she also knew it would break your heart, so she carried the burden alone. She bought their freedom so you could keep your pride in them. I closed the book. The leather cover felt cold under my fingers. My pride. That was a laugh. I had no pride left in them. Whatever illusion of a family I had was gone, buried under lines of ink and dollar signs. Paxson opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. This is the last piece, Henry, he said. This is the Martha Caldwell Living Trust. He slid it across the desk. The deed to the house isn't in Lucas's name, Paxson explained. Tanya lied to you, or perhaps they forged a document to scare you. The house, the stocks, the cash, everything is in this trust. And as of 3 days ago, you are the sole trustee and the primary beneficiary. I touched the document. What about them, I asked. Paxson leaned forward. Section 4, paragraph 2. It states that no distribution of assets shall be made to Lucas Caldwell, Emily Caldwell, or any of their spouses without the express written consent of the trustee. That is you, Henry. You have total control. You can give them everything, or you can give them absolutely nothing. It is entirely up to you. I sat back in the chair. The power of it washed over me. For the last 48 hours, I had been a victim. I had been a piece of debris being swept away by their cruelty. But now the tide had turned. I held the keys to the kingdom. I held the deed to the roof over their heads. I held the ledger of their sins. I thought about the way Tanya had looked at me at the funeral. I thought about the brochure for the nursing home. They wanted to discard me because I had no value to them. They thought the Bank of Martha was closed, so they were stripping the fixtures. They didn't know the bank was under new management. I picked up the black ledger. I ran my hand over the cover one last time. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I wasn't just a grieving husband. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I stood up. The joints in my knees didn't ache. My back was straight. The fog of grief that had clouded my mind for 3 days had evaporated, burned away by the white-hot heat of the truth. "Mr. Paxson," I said, my voice steady and low, "I need to make a withdrawal. Not a big one. Just enough to buy a few things." Paxson smiled. "Anything you need, Henry?" "I need a new suit," I said. "I need a haircut. And I need a hotel room. The best one in the city." I looked at the blue trust document. "And I need a lawyer," I added. "One who enjoys a good fight." Paxson picked up his phone. "I have just the man," he said. "He is a shark, and he hates bullies." I nodded. "Good. Because I have a lesson to teach, and it is going to be expensive." I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, my children were probably congratulating themselves. They were probably counting the money they would get from selling my house. They were probably laughing about how easy it was to push the old man out. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them enjoy their victory for a few more hours. Because when the storm hits, they won't even see it coming. And this time, Martha won't be there to bail them out. This time, they answer to me. I drove back to the house in silence. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and black under the streetlights. I parked my car a block away, needing a moment to prepare for the performance of a lifetime. I looked in the rearview mirror. I messed up my hair, unbuttoned my collar, and rubbed my eyes until they were red and irritated. I needed to look broken. I needed to look like a man who had just lost everything. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the small, folded note Martha had left tucked inside the black ledger. It was short. Just one sentence written in her shaky final script. "Give them one last chance to be human, Henry, but don't hold your breath." I put the note in my pocket right next to the brass key. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump, letting the years of weight settle back onto my frame. I wasn't the millionaire with a shark lawyer on retainer anymore. I was Henry the burden, Henry the liability. I walked up the driveway, dragging my feet. The house was blazing with light. I could hear music, upbeat celebratory music. They were partying. My wife was in the ground for 3 days, and they were throwing a party in her living room. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled of pizza and cheap beer. Lucas, Tanya, and Emily were in the living room. They had cleared off the coffee table and covered it with brochures for new cars and vacation printouts. They were spending the money they thought they would get from selling the house. They froze when they saw me. The music died abruptly as Emily scrambled to hit pause on her phone. Tanya was the first to recover. She stood up, her face twisting into a mask of annoyance. "Henry," she said, her voice sharp, "we thought you were packing. The movers are coming tomorrow morning. You can't just wander in here and disrupt us. We are busy handling the estate." I didn't answer immediately. I walked into the room and sank onto the nearest chair, burying my face in my hands. I let out a shuddering breath, a sound of pure despair. "What is it now?" Dad Lucas asked, sounding more bored than concerned. "Don't tell me you lost your wallet again." "It is worse," I said, my voice trembling. I went to the bank. The room went deadly silent. I could feel their eyes boring into me. Greed has a specific feeling. It feels like a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. "The bank," Tanya repeated slowly. "Which bank? Did you find an account? Is there money?" I looked up at them, making sure my eyes were wet. "No," I said. "There is no money. I found a notice. A tax lien." Emily scoffed. "A tax lien?" "Mom paid the taxes. She was obsessed with them." "That is what I thought," I said. "But the bank manager told me there was a mistake, a filing error from 5 years ago. The penalties have compounded. The interest has exploded. I paused for effect, watching them exchange nervous glances. How much? Lucas asked, his voice tight. $50,000, I whispered. Tanya shrieked. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. She threw her wineglass against the fireplace, shattering it into 1,000 sparkling shards. 50,000, she screamed. Are you kidding me? That stupid, incompetent old woman? She couldn't even die right. She had to leave us a bill. Tanya, Lucas warned, glancing at me. Don't you Tanya me, she yelled, spinning on him. We were counting on the house money. We have debts, Lucas, real debts. And now we have to pay off the IRS before we can sell. She ruined everything. She is dead and she is still ruining our lives. I watched her. I watched the woman who had eaten at my table for 15 years call my wife names. I watched my son say nothing to defend his mother. It gets worse, I said. They turned to look at me, fear replacing the anger. The bank said because the debt is in both our names and because I can't pay it, they are going to prosecute. They said it looks like fraud. They said if I don't come up with $50,000 by Friday, I could go to prison. I stood up and walked over to Lucas. I grabbed his hand. It was limp and cold. Son, please, I begged, channeling every ounce of desperation I could muster. I can't go to jail. I am 70 years old. It would kill me. You have to help me. You have savings, right? You and Tanya. Or maybe you can take a loan. Just until we sell the house. Please. I am your father. Don't let them take me. Lucas pulled his hand away as if I were contagious. He took a step back, putting the coffee table between us. Dad, be serious, he said, his voice cold. We don't have $50,000 lying around. That is why we need to sell this place. And we certainly can't take out a loan for your tax problems. We have our own credit to worry about. But I will pay you back, I pleaded. Once the house sells. If it sells, Tanya interjected. Who knows what other mess Martha left behind? The house might be worthless if there are liens on it. No, absolutely not. We are not throwing good money after bad. I turned to Emily. My baby girl. The one I used to carry on my shoulders. Emily, honey, I said. Please. I am scared. Emily picked up her purse and clutched it to her chest. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. Dad. I can't, she said. I have the kids. I have expenses. 50,000 is... It is impossible. Maybe you could sell something. Sell what I asked. You already took the silver. You took the jewelry. I have nothing left. Then figure it out. She snapped, her facade cracking. Sell a kidney. Join a medical trial. I don't know, but don't look at us. This is your mess. You and Mom made it. You fix it. I looked at them, really looked at them. The test was simple. Help your father in his moment of greatest need. Save him from prison. And they had failed. They hadn't just failed. They had failed with enthusiasm. They didn't care if I went to jail. They only cared that my debt might cut into their profit margin. So that is it, I said quietly. You are just going to let me go under. We aren't letting you do anything, Tanya said, regaining her composure. You did this to yourself by being clueless, by letting Martha handle everything without supervision. Ignorance has consequences, Henry. She walked over to the front door and opened it wide. The cold night air rushed in. And honestly, she said, if you are in legal trouble, we can't have you staying here. If the police come, we don't want to be involved. We have reputations to protect. She pointed to the darkness outside. You need to leave. Now. I stared at her. You are kicking me out. Tonight. Tonight, Lucas confirmed. He walked past me into the hallway. I heard him rummaging in the closet. He came back a moment later, holding 2 black garbage bags. He threw them at my feet. "Here are your clothes," he said. "I packed them while you were gone. Everything from your room is in there." I looked at the black plastic bags. My life, my clothes, my memories, reduced to trash. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "Shady Pines has an emergency intake," Tanya said. "Or a shelter." "Honestly, Henry, at this point it is not our problem. You are a grown man. Act like one." She reached out and grabbed my arm. Her grip was strong, painful. She pulled me toward the door. I didn't resist. I let her drag me. I wanted to feel the full weight of their betrayal. I wanted to remember the feeling of her fingernails digging into my arm through my coat. She shoved me out onto the porch. Lucas followed, tossing the garbage bags out after me. They landed with a wet thud on the concrete. "Give me your key," Tanya demanded, holding out her hand. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed the brass key to box 404. For a second, I almost smiled, but I pulled out the house key instead. The key to the mortgage I had paid. The key to the door I had painted. I dropped it into her palm. "Good luck, Henry," she said. She slammed the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide home. Then I heard the chain lock slide into place. I stood there on the dark porch, staring at the wood grain of the door. I listened. From inside, I heard laughter. Relieved, hysterical laughter. "Can you believe him?" I heard Tanya say. "Trying to stick us with his debt." "Unbelievable." "He will be fine," Lucas said. "He always lands on his feet." Or he doesn't. Either way, the house is ours now. I picked up the garbage bags. They were heavy, awkward. I walked down the steps and down the driveway to my car. I opened the trunk and threw them in. I stood by the driver's side door and looked back at the house. It glowed warmly in the night, a beacon of comfort that I was barred from entering. But as I looked at it, the sadness that had weighed on me for days began to lift. It evaporated like mist in the sun. They had passed judgment on me. They had decided I was worthless. They had decided I was disposable. But they had made a fatal error. They had assumed the game was over. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key again. I held it up to the streetlight. It glinted in the darkness, a promise of retribution. I wasn't the pathetic old man they thought I was. I was the trustee. I was the landlord. And I was about to bring the ceiling down on their heads. A cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just realized the sheep have locked themselves in the pen with him. "Enjoy the house, kids," I whispered. "Keep it warm for me." I got into my car and started the engine. I didn't look back as I drove away. I wasn't going to a shelter. I was going to the Ritz-Carlton. And tomorrow I had a meeting with a lawyer who was going to help me turn their world into ash. The test was over. The lesson was about to begin. The valet at the Grand Pittsburgh Hotel didn't even blink when I pulled my rusted, mud-splattered sedan up to the main entrance. He opened the door with the kind of professional deference that money buys, treating my old coat and garbage bags of clothes as if they were Louis Vuitton luggage. I handed him $100 bill from the thick stack in my pocket and told him to keep the car close but out of sight. Walking through the gold-leafed lobby felt like stepping into a different universe. The air smelled of fresh lilies and old money. I approached the front desk, my spine straight, my eyes clear. I didn't ask for a room. I asked for the presidential suite. When I slid my new black debit card across the marble counter, the concierge raised an eyebrow for a fraction of a second before typing rapidly and handing me a heavy electronic key card with both hands. "Welcome home, Mr. Caldwell," he said. An hour later, I was a different man. I had stripped off the damp, humiliating clothes of the beggar my children thought I was. I had scrubbed the grime of the grave and the grease of the old house from my skin in a shower that had 6 different spray jets. Now I was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse, wrapped in a plush white silk robe that felt like a cloud against my skin. In my hand was a crystal glass filled with a Cabernet that cost $500 a bottle. It was rich, complex, and tasted of dark berries and victory. I took a sip and looked out at the city lights sprawling below me. Somewhere down there in the darkness of the suburbs was the house I had built. But from up here it looked small, insignificant. I turned away from the view and walked over to the oversized velvet sofa. I picked up the new iPad I had purchased from the hotel's business center. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. I sat down and tapped the screen, opening the app for the hidden security cameras I had installed months ago when Martha first got sick. I had put them in to monitor her caregivers to make sure she was safe when I was out running errands. My children didn't know they existed. They didn't know that the smoke detector in the living room and the motion sensor in the hallway were watching them. The feed loaded grainy but clear in the night vision mode. I watched, sipping my wine, as the interior of my former home flickered onto the screen. It was chaos. They weren't celebrating anymore. The pizza boxes were pushed onto the floor. The music was gone. Lucas and Tanya were moving through the house like a pair of rabid raccoons. They were tearing the place apart. I watched Tanya in the master bedroom. She was ripping the linens off the bed I had shared with Martha for 40 years. She was shaking out the pillows, throwing the mattress onto its side, slicing open the fabric of the box spring with a kitchen knife. She was looking for money. She was convinced that if there was a tax lien, there must be cash hidden somewhere to pay it. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, ugly greed. She looked frantic, sweating, her hair wild. I switched the camera view to the living room. Lucas was there with a crowbar. He was prying up the loose floorboard near the fireplace, the one I had meant to fix for years. He ripped the wood up with a savage grunt, shining a flashlight into the crawlspace. Finding nothing, he smashed the board against the wall in frustration, leaving a deep gouge in the plaster. "Nothing," I heard him yell, his voice tinny through the iPad speakers. "There is nothing here, Tanya. The old man is broke. He really is broke." "Keep looking," Tanya shrieked from the bedroom. "Check the vents. Check the toilet tanks. Old people always hide money in the toilet." I watched them destroy the sanctuary Martha had kept pristine for decades. I saw Emily come into the frame. She was in the dining room, pulling the china out of the hutch and throwing the plates she didn't think were valuable onto the floor, shattering them. She was looking for taped envelopes behind the drawers. It was grotesque. It was a violation. Watching them desecrate my home should have broken my heart. It should have made me weep. But sitting there in my silk robe surrounded by luxury, I didn't feel sadness. I felt validation. Every smashed plate, every slashed mattress, every hole punched in the wall was proof. It was proof that Martha was right. It was proof that Paxson was right. And it was proof that I was doing the right thing. These weren't children who had made a mistake. These were scavengers picking the meat off a carcass. They didn't care about the house. They didn't care about the memories. They only cared about what they could extract. I took another sip of wine, savoring the finish. I had seen enough. The test was over, and they had failed so spectacularly that there was no room left for doubt. I closed the camera app and opened my contacts. I scrolled down to the number Paxson had programmed into my phone earlier that day. Attorney Strickland. It was almost midnight, but Paxson had assured me that Strickland was the kind of lawyer who slept with his phone in his hand. I pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "This is Strickland." "Mr. Strickland, this is Henry Caldwell," I said, my voice deep and resonant in the quiet suite. "Mr. Caldwell," Strickland said, his tone sharpening instantly. "Paxson told me you might call. I have the files open in front of me. Have you made a decision?" I looked at the black screen of the iPad. I thought about the garbage bags on the driveway. I thought about the nursing home brochure. "I have," I said. "How do you want to proceed?" Strickland asked. "We can file for a simple eviction in the morning, give them 30 days. Or we can negotiate a departure." No, I said, cutting him off. No negotiations. No 30 days. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. Activate Article 4 of the trust, I commanded. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of pages turning. Article 4, Strickland repeated, his voice dropping an octave. The immediate liquidation and recovery clause. Mr. Caldwell, you understand that this is the nuclear option. It authorizes the immediate recall of all informal loans classified as debts in the ledger. It triggers the immediate foreclosure on any property held by the trust that is occupied by non-beneficiaries. It freezes any assets linked to the estate. It will destroy their credit. It will lock them out of their bank accounts if they are co-signed. It is aggressive. I looked out at the city lights one last time. I pictured Tanya's face as she slammed the door on me. They threw my clothes in the mud, Mr. Strickland, I said softly. They changed the locks while I was still standing on the porch. Aggressive is exactly what I want. Understood, Strickland said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. He was a shark, and I had just dropped blood in the water. I will have the papers filed at the courthouse when they open at 8 a.m. The sheriff will serve the eviction notice by noon. The bank freeze will happen simultaneously. They won't know what hit them. Good, I said. And Strickland? Yes, sir. Make sure the eviction notice specifies that they are liable for any damages to the property. I have video evidence of them destroying the interior. I want every scratched floorboard and broken plate added to their debt. Consider it done, Strickland said. Sleep well, Mr. Caldwell. Tomorrow is going to be a very busy day. I hung up the phone and placed it on the marble side table. I finished my wine in one long swallow. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the last of the chill from the rain. I stood up and walked to the massive king-sized bed. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, crisp and cool. I took off my robe and climbed in, sinking into the mattress. It felt like floating. For 6 months I had slept with one eye open, worrying about the heating bill, worrying about Martha's health, worrying about my children's future. I had carried the weight of the world on my shoulders, thinking I was weak, thinking I was failing. But tonight, the weight was gone. I wasn't the victim. I was the hammer. And tomorrow morning, the hammer was going to fall. I closed my eyes. The image of the smashed wine glass in the fireplace faded. The sound of Tanya's screaming faded. All I could hear was the quiet hum of the city and the steady beating of my own heart. I didn't dream of my children. I dreamt of Martha. In the dream, she was standing at the door of the bank, young and beautiful, holding a ledger in one hand and a sword in the other. She smiled at me, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled back. I slept. It was the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had known in years. 3 days later, I sat in the high-backed leather chair at the head of the conference table in Attorney Strickland's office. The room was designed to intimidate. It was situated on the 42nd floor with a panoramic view of the skyline that screamed power and influence. The table was a slab of polished mahogany long enough to land a small plane on. The air was cool and smelled of lemon oil and expensive coffee. I ran my hand over the fabric of my trousers. They were part of a charcoal gray Italian wool suit that I had been fitted for just 48 hours ago. The tailor had worked a miracle, rushing the alterations for a substantial fee that I paid without blinking. I wore a crisp white shirt, a silk tie in a deep shade of crimson, and hand-stitched leather Oxfords that cost more than my first car. My hair was trimmed and styled, my face was clean-shaven, and for the first time in years, I smelled like sandalwood instead of sawdust. I looked at my reflection in the dark window glass. I didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked formidable. He looked dangerous. Strickland sat to my right, organizing a stack of files with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. He checked his watch. "They are late," he noted dryly. "It is a power play. They want you to wait." Let them play, I said, calmly swirling the espresso in my cup. They think they are coming to a victory lap. Let them take their time. I wasn't impatient. I had waited 45 years for the truth, and 3 days for justice. A few minutes of tardiness meant nothing to me. 10 minutes later, the heavy double doors swung open. I heard them before I saw them. Tanya's voice carried through the reception area loud and grating. She was laughing. I told the dealership to hold the Cayenne, she was saying. I put $5,000 down on the card this morning. Once the check clears from the house sale, I will wire the rest. Red interior, obviously. They breezed into the room, bringing a whirlwind of noise and entitlement with them. Tanya led the pack, wearing sunglasses indoors and a dress that was too bright for a grieving family member. Lucas followed close behind, looking smug in a polo shirt and khakis. Emily brought up the rear, texting furiously, probably telling her friends she was about to be rich. They were so confident, so sure of their place in the world. They didn't even look at the head of the table at first. They were too busy eyeing the expensive decor, calculating how much the lawyer fees would cut into their profits. Okay, let us get this over with, Tanya announced, throwing her purse onto the table. We have a meeting with the realtor at 2. Just give us the papers to sign for the house transfer and we can... She stopped mid-sentence. She had finally looked down the length of the table. Her eyes landed on me. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. She saw a man in a $3,000 suit sitting in the power seat, and her brain couldn't reconcile that image with the father-in-law she had kicked onto the street 3 nights ago. She blinked. She took off her sunglasses. Her mouth dropped open slightly. Henry, she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. Lucas and Emily spun around. They stared at me. Their eyes went wide. They took in the suit, the shoes, the grooming, the way I sat relaxed and commanding in the chair. What is this? Lucas sputtered. He let out a short, nervous laugh. Dad, what are you wearing? Did you rent a tuxedo or something? Who are you trying to impress? He looked at Strickland, then back at me, shaking his head. You look ridiculous, he sneered, trying to regain his footing. Like a kid playing dress-up. Did you spend your last Social Security check on a rental just to come here and beg for money again? Because the answer is still no, Dad. We aren't paying your tax lien. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. I just looked at him with a steady, impassive gaze. I let his insult hang in the air until it started to sound desperate rather than cutting. I took a slow sip of my espresso and placed the cup back on the saucer with a deliberate clink. Then I turned my head slightly and nodded to Strickland. It was a small gesture, a subtle command, but it shifted the entire energy of the room. It said, I am the one in charge. Strickland cleared his throat. It was a loud, authoritative sound that cut through Lucas's mockery like a knife. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, he said, gesturing to the chairs on the opposite side of the table. You too, Mrs. Caldwell and Ms. Caldwell. We have a lot to get through, and my hourly rate does not pause for personal insults. Tanya bristled, but she sat down. Lucas and Emily followed suit, looking confused and wary. They sat in a row like naughty schoolchildren called to the principal's office. We are here, Tanya said, crossing her arms defensively, because you said you found a will. We assumed Martha died intestate since we couldn't find one in the house. But it doesn't matter, really. The house was transferred to us via power of attorney before she died, so that is a done deal. We just need to clear up any residual accounts. Strickland opened the thick blue folder in front of him. He didn't look up. Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, that is incorrect, he said, his voice smooth and cold. The power of attorney document you are referring to was superseded. 6 months ago, when Mrs. Martha Caldwell received her terminal diagnosis, she came to this office. She established the Martha Caldwell Living Trust. She transferred all her assets, including the deed to the property at 42 Elm Street, into that trust. Tanya frowned. Okay, so the house is in a trust. Fine. We are the heirs. Just dissolve the trust and distribute the asset. It is the same difference. Strickland finally looked up. He took off his reading glasses and folded them on the desk. He looked at them with a mixture of pity and predatory anticipation. I am afraid you are laboring under a significant misapprehension regarding the nature of the estate, he said. You seem to believe that the house is the primary asset, and you seem to believe that you are the beneficiaries. Lucas leaned forward. The house is the only asset, he said. Mom was a housewife. Dad is broke. The house is worth maybe $400,000. That is it. I watched them. I watched the ignorance dancing behind their eyes. They had no idea. They had lived their entire lives thinking they were smarter than us, thinking we were simple peasants, while they were the sophisticated modern generation. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Strickland pulled a single sheet of paper from the file. He held it up. Your mother was not just a housewife, he said. She was an investor, a very astute one. For 45 years, she managed a diversified portfolio of securities, real estate, and bonds. He paused, letting the words sink in. Emily laughed nervously. Mom. Investing. She clipped coupons for tuna fish. She did, Strickland agreed, because she understood the value of $1, unlike some people in this room. He placed the paper on the table and slid it toward them. It faced them, but from where I sat, I knew exactly what number was printed at the bottom. According to the audit completed last Friday, Strickland said, his voice ringing with finality, the total value of the assets held within the Martha Caldwell Living Trust, including the accumulated dividends and the current market value of the real estate holdings, is $28,450,000. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical thing, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Tanya's eyes bulged. Her face went from flushed to chalk white in a second. Lucas's mouth fell open, his jaw literally dropping. Emily made a small choking sound. 28, Tanya whispered. Million, Strickland confirmed. They froze. They stared at the paper. They stared at me. The realization hit them like a freight train. The old man in the rented room. The man they had kicked out. The man they had mocked 5 minutes ago. I was sitting on a mountain of gold. I watched the gears turning in Tanya's head. I saw the shock turn into greed. I saw her doing the math. 28 million divided by 3. I saw her mentally upgrading the Porsche to a Ferrari. I saw her buying a mansion. She looked at me and suddenly her face transformed. The sneer vanished. A wide, trembling smile replaced it. Oh my God, Henry, she breathed. This is a miracle. She was a genius. We are rich. We are all rich. She reached across the table, her hand outstretched toward mine. Dad, Lucas stammered, his voice shaking. You knew. Is that why you are dressed like that? I didn't take Tanya's hand. I didn't answer Lucas. I just kept watching them, my face a mask of stone. Strickland cleared his throat again, drawing their attention back to him. I believe you missed the second part of my statement, he said. I said the assets are in the trust. I did not say you are the beneficiaries. Tanya's hand froze in midair. What do you mean, she snapped. We are her children. Who else would be the beneficiary? Strickland picked up the trust document. He flipped to the second page. According to the terms of the trust, he read the sole trustee and primary beneficiary with absolute discretion over the distribution of all assets is Mr. Henry Caldwell. He looked at them over the top of the paper. The children have no claim, he said, unless Mr. Caldwell decides to give them one. The room went silent again, but this time it wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of terror. They looked at me, and for the first time in their lives, they didn't see a father or a victim. They saw the man who held their fate in his hands, and they remembered Friday night. They remembered the garbage bags. They remembered the locks. I leaned forward. The leather of my chair creaked. I placed my elbows on the table and steeped my fingers. I believe we have some business to discuss. I said, my voice low and steady. And I believe you are sitting in my chair. Tanya stared at Strickland as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. The words sole beneficiary bounced around the room, echoing off the mahogany walls, but she refused to let them land. She stood up so abruptly, her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a sound like a gunshot. "That is impossible," she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "He is senile. He is confused. Just 3 days ago, he came to us crying about a tax lien. He thought he was going to prison. He doesn't know what day it is, let alone how to manage an estate. You cannot give him control. He is incompetent." She pointed a shaking finger at me. Her face was twisted ugly with desperation. "Look at him," she yelled. "He is a retired engineer with no money. He lived off his wife. He is useless. This trust is a mistake. It has to be a mistake." Strickland didn't even blink. He waited for her to stop screaming, his expression one of mild boredom. He adjusted his glasses and looked at her over the rim. "Mr. Caldwell is not senile, Mrs. Caldwell," Strickland said calmly. "In fact, before this trust was finalized, Mrs. Martha Caldwell insisted on a full competency evaluation for her husband. We have 2 independent affidavits from leading neurologists certifying that Henry is of sound mind and perfectly capable of managing his affairs." He paused, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. As for the tax lien story, Strickland continued, glancing at me with a nod of respect. "That was a test. A fabricated scenario designed to gauge your loyalty and compassion. A test, I might add, that you failed with spectacular cruelty." Tanya's mouth snapped shut. The color drained from her face until she looked like a corpse. She looked at me, and I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. The crying, the desperation, the plea for help. It was all a performance, and she had walked right into the trap. Lucas made a low, wounded sound in his throat. He looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. "You lied to us, Dad," he whispered. "You tricked us." I didn't answer. I didn't owe him an answer. Strickland pulled another document from the folder. He slid it across the table toward them. It hit the wood with a heavy slap. "Now, regarding your current living arrangements," Strickland said, his tone shifting from explanatory to punitive. "Since the property at 42 Elm Street is an asset of the trust, and since you have no lease agreement and are currently occupying the premises without the trustees' consent, your presence there is considered trespassing." He tapped the document with his index finger. "This is a formal notice to vacate," he announced. "You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects and leave the property. The locks will be changed tomorrow at noon. Any items remaining after that time will be considered abandoned and will be disposed of at the trustees' discretion." 24 hours. Emily gasped, clutching her chest. But where will we go?" "We gave up our apartment. We moved in to help Mom." "You moved in to save rent," I said, speaking for the first time. "And you didn't help your mother. You watched her die while you waited for the check." Strickland wasn't done. He reached into the folder again. This time he didn't pull out a legal document. He pulled out the black ledger. He placed the worn leather notebook in the center of the table. It looked small and harmless, sitting there on the polished wood, but to my children it must have looked like a bomb. "Your mother was a meticulous bookkeeper," Strickland said. "She kept a record of every significant disbursement she made to each of you over the last 20 years. The settlements, the bailouts, the hush money." He opened the book to a marked page. "According to the terms of the trust, these disbursements were not gifts," Strickland stated. "They were classified as interest-free demand loans, loans that became due upon her death." He looked at Lucas. $200,000 paid to settle a hit-and-run incident in 2010, Strickland read. He looked at Emily. $150,000 to settle gambling debts in 2015. He looked at Tanya. $75,000 for legal fees and corporate restitution in 2018, plus various other loans totaling $25,000. The room was silent as a tomb. They stared at the book as if it were cursed. They knew. They remembered every single dollar. They just never thought they would have to pay it back. The total outstanding debt to the estate is $450,000, Strickland said, closing the book with a snap. Mr. Caldwell, acting as trustee, has instructed me to call in these loans immediately. He pulled out 3 separate demand letters and slid one to each of them. You have 30 days to repay the full amount, Strickland said. If payment is not received, we will file suit. We will attach liens to your wages, your vehicles, and any other assets you possess. We will freeze your bank accounts. We will garnish your future earnings until every cent is repaid. It was the death blow. I watched it land. I watched the last shred of their arrogance disintegrate. Tanya slumped into her chair, her eyes vacant. She had spent the money. She had spent money she didn't even have yet on a car she couldn't afford. She was ruined. Her corporate career, her reputation, her financial future, it was all gone. Emily started to cry soft, hopeless sobs. She knew she couldn't pay. She knew she was going to lose everything, but it was Lucas who broke me. My son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike. He slid out of his chair. He didn't sit. He didn't stand. He fell to his knees on the plush carpet. He crawled toward me, grabbing the edge of my jacket with shaking hands. Dad, please, he begged, tears streaming down his face. Dad, I am sorry. I am so sorry. We were wrong. We were stupid. Please don't do this. I can't pay that back. It will kill me. Dad, please. We are family. I looked down at him. I looked at the man who had thrown garbage bags at my feet in the rain. I looked at the man who had poured my anniversary wine down his throat and called it vinegar. I looked for a spark of love, of genuine remorse, but all I saw was fear. Fear for himself. Fear of being poor. I stood up. Lucas's hands slipped off my jacket. I smoothed the fabric of my suit. I picked up the black ledger and tucked it under my arm. You are right, Lucas, I said, my voice quiet but filling the room. We are family, and family teaches you the hardest lessons. I turned to Strickland. Proceed with the filings, I said. Yes, Mr. Caldwell, Strickland replied, dipping his head. I turned and walked toward the heavy double doors. I heard Tanya whisper my name, but it sounded like a ghost. I heard Lucas sobbing on the floor. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked out of the office past the receptionist and into the elevator. When the doors closed, cutting off the sound of their ruin, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, heavy peace. It was done. The debt was called in. The balance was restored. I was alone in the elevator, but I wasn't lonely. I had my dignity. I had my wife's legacy. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. The following week was a blur of legal motions and swift, brutal justice. I didn't have to lift a finger. Strickland and his team handled everything with the precision of a military strike. I sat in my new living room, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, and watched the reports come in. It was like watching a controlled demolition. The first pillar to fall was their financial illusion. Tanya was at the Porsche dealership, ready to finalize the paperwork for her red Cayenne. She had strutted in demanding premium service, already treating the staff like her personal servants. When she handed over her debit card to pay the balance, she expected it to go through. She expected the money she had transferred from her joint account with Lucas to cover it. But the machine beeped. Declined. She tried another card. Declined. She screamed at the salesman, accusing them of incompetence until she checked her banking app. Frozen. Every account linked to her name, every joint account she shared with Lucas, had been locked down by a court order. Strickland had filed the lawsuit for the recovery of the $450,000 debt, and because they had no assets to secure it, other than cash, the judge had granted an emergency freeze. The dealership manager, a man she had belittled just minutes before, politely asked her to leave. She lost the deposit. She lost the car. And for the first time in her adult life, she lost her dignity in public. She had to call a friend to pick her up because her rideshare app was linked to the frozen card. The second pillar fell 48 hours later. The eviction. I wasn't there to see it, but the sheriff's report was detailed. At exactly noon on Tuesday, deputies arrived at 42 Elm Street. Lucas and Tanya hadn't packed. They were in the kitchen arguing, surrounded by half-filled boxes and empty wine bottles. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I wouldn't actually throw my own son out on the street. They were wrong. The deputies gave them 15 minutes to gather essential items. Tanya tried to barricade herself in the master bedroom, screaming about squatters' rights and elderly abuse, ironically trying to claim the very protections she had denied me. They were escorted out the front door, the same door they had shoved me through less than a week prior. The locksmith was right behind them, drilling out the cylinders before they even reached the sidewalk. Their possessions, the expensive clothes, the electronics, the furniture they hadn't destroyed, were left inside, seized as collateral against the debt they owed the trust. They stood on the curb with a few suitcases, watching as the house they had already mentally sold was sealed shut against them. The neighbors watched from behind curtains. The spectacle was complete. The final pillar to crumble was their marriage. It didn't take long. Adversity reveals character, and their character was built on greed and convenience. Without the glue of my wife's money holding them together, they fell apart. Tanya didn't stick around to comfort her husband. She didn't offer to weather the storm together. She blamed him. She screamed that he was a loser, a mama's boy who couldn't even secure his own inheritance. She packed her suitcases into her friend's car and left for her mother's house in Ohio within the hour. By Thursday, Strickland received a notification from her lawyer. She was filing for divorce. She was trying to distance herself from the debt, claiming she had no knowledge of the loans Lucas had taken from his mother. It wouldn't work, of course. Martha's ledger was meticulous. Tanya's signature was on the receipts. But it marked the end of the trio that had tormented me. Lucas was left alone. He had no wife, no home, no money, and no mother to bail him out. He ended up crashing on the couch of an old drinking buddy, a man who lived in a cramped apartment on the south side. It was a far cry from the suburban comfort he felt entitled to. On Saturday morning, my building's security intercom buzzed. It was the concierge. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice polite but firm. "There are two individuals here to see you, a Mr. Lucas Caldwell and a Ms. Emily Caldwell. They say they are your children. They are causing a bit of a scene. They are demanding to come up." I walked to the intercom panel on the wall. I pressed the video button. The screen flickered to life, showing the view from the lobby entrance. There they were. Lucas looked disheveled. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn at the lawyer's office, now wrinkled and stained. He hadn't shaved. He looked 10 years older. Emily was beside him, her eyes puffy, her makeup smeared. She looked terrified. They were arguing with the large man in the blazer who guarded the elevators. "Please," I heard Lucas pleading, his voice cracking. "He is my father. I just need to talk to him. Just 5 minutes. We have nowhere to go, please." I watched them. I watched the desperation in their body language. It mirrored exactly how I had felt standing in their living room begging for help with a fake tax lien. The symmetry was perfect. But unlike them, I didn't feel a sadistic pleasure. I didn't feel the urge to mock them. I just felt a profound detachment. They were strangers to me now. Strangers who shared my last name. I pressed the talk button. "Send them away," I said. The concierge nodded. "Mr. Caldwell does not wish to see you," he told them. "You need to leave the premises immediately, or we will call the police." Lucas looked up at the camera. He knew I was watching. He pressed his face close to the lens. "Dad," he screamed. "Dad, I know you are there. Please. I am sorry. I will do anything. I will work it off. Just don't leave me like this." "Tanya left me, Dad. She took everything she could carry. I am alone." "I am your son." I didn't answer. I didn't press the button to unlock the door. I simply watched. "Wait," I said to the concierge before he could cut the feed. "Give them a message for me." "Yes, Mr. Caldwell, tell them. Tell them that independence is the belated gift I am giving them. Tell them that Martha isn't here to fix this, and neither am I." The concierge relayed the message. I saw the words hit Lucas like physical blows. He slumped against the glass door, sliding down until he was sitting on the pavement. Emily put her hand over her mouth and sobbed. Eventually, security escorted them away from the entrance. I switched the camera view to the external feed. It had started to rain again, a cold, gray Pittsburgh drizzle. I saw Lucas standing on the sidewalk across the street. He was looking up at the building, scanning the windows, trying to find me. He looked small. He looked wet. He looked exactly like I had looked standing in the cemetery, lost and abandoned. But there was a difference. I had been abandoned because I trusted too much. He was abandoned because he cared too little. I stood there for a long time watching my son cry in the rain. It was a tragedy, yes, but it was a necessary one. He had to break to be rebuilt, or he would stay broken. That was his choice now. My part in his story was over. I turned away from the screen and walked back to my desk. The black ledger was sitting there closed. Beside it was a new leather notebook, empty and waiting. I picked up a pen. I had work to do. I had a foundation to plan. I had a legacy to build. And I had a Monday morning appointment to keep. It has been exactly 1 year since I stood in the rain at the cemetery and watched my life fall apart. Today, the sun is shining over Pittsburgh. It is a bright, crisp Monday morning, the kind of day that makes the steel and glass of the city look like diamonds. I adjusted the rearview mirror of my car. It is not the rusted sedan I used to drive. It is a silver Mercedes, solid and reliable, much like the life I have rebuilt. I pulled into the reserved parking spot in front of First City Bank. The spot has a small plaque with my name on it, but I don't park there because of ego. I park there because I have a job to do. I walked into the lobby, and the atmosphere was very different from that terrifying morning 12 months ago. The security guard, the same man who had once looked at me with suspicion, tipped his cap and held the door open. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell," he said with a genuine smile. I greeted him by name. I know the names of everyone here now. I walked past the teller line where Jessica was training a new employee. She looked up and waved. I waved back. I wasn't just a customer anymore. I wasn't just a legacy client. I was family. I took the elevator up to the executive floor. Paxson was waiting for me outside the conference room. He looked older, perhaps a bit more tired, but his eyes were still sharp. He shook my hand warmly. "Good morning, Henry," he said. "We have a full docket today. The board is already seated." I nodded and straightened my tie. I wasn't wearing a funeral suit today. I was wearing a navy blazer and slacks, comfortable but authoritative. We walked into the boardroom. It was the same room where I had destroyed my children's greed, but the air felt lighter now. The ghosts were gone. Around the table sat 4 other people: a lawyer, a social worker, a community organizer, and a retired judge. They were the board of directors for the Martha Caldwell Foundation, or as we called it, Martha's Hope. I took my seat at the head of the table. In front of me was a stack of files. These weren't stock certificates or deeds to commercial buildings. These were applications, stories of people who were broken, just like I had been. Let us begin, I said. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing cases. There was a 70-year-old woman in the Hill District whose grandson had forged her signature and taken a reverse mortgage on her home. She was facing eviction in 3 days. We can stop that, I said, signing the authorization form. Get Strickland on the phone. Have him file an injunction and pay off the arrears, and get her a security system. Next was a young man, a structural engineering student at the university, who was about to drop out because his father had gambled away his tuition fund. He had straight A's. He reminded me of myself 50 years ago, full of dreams, but empty pockets. Full scholarship, I said without hesitation. Pay it all. Books, housing, everything. But tell him he has to maintain that GPA. Martha would have insisted on standards. We went through case after case. We were a safety net for those who had been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love them. We were the shield that Martha had been for me, but on a much larger scale. Every check I signed felt like a conversation with her. Every person we saved felt like a brick being laid in the monument of her memory. Toward the end of the meeting, Paxson slid a folder toward me. It wasn't an application. It was a status report. I opened it. It was a brief update on Lucas and Emily. I didn't intervene in their lives anymore. I didn't send money. But I kept an eye on them from a distance, mostly to ensure they stayed away from the foundation. Lucas was working at a distribution center for a shipping company. He was driving a forklift. The report said he had perfect attendance for 6 months. He was living in a studio apartment, paying his own rent, buying his own food. He looked tired in the surveillance photo attached to the file, but he didn't look broken. He looked like a man who was finally learning what it meant to earn his keep. Tanya had finalized the divorce and moved to another state, chasing some other dream of easy money. Emily had downsized to a small rental and was working as a receptionist at a dental office. She was paying off her debts dollar by painful dollar. I closed the folder. They were struggling. They were tired. But they were standing on their own 2 feet. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do, watching them fall, but it was the only way they would ever learn to rise. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't resentful. I just wished them peace, the kind of peace you only get when you stop expecting the world to hand you everything on a silver platter. The meeting adjourned just before noon. The board members shook my hand and filed out, leaving me alone with Paxson. He gathered his papers and looked at me. "She would be proud, Henry," he said quietly. "You know that, right? She built the engine, but you are the one driving it." I smiled. "Thank you, Charles. See you next Monday." He left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. It was the same view I had seen from the hotel room on that night of retribution, but it looked different now. It didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a home. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and pulled out my wallet. I opened it to the small plastic-covered window where I kept her picture. It was a photo of Martha from 20 years ago. She was standing in her garden wearing a sun hat and dirty gloves, holding a basket of tomatoes. She was smiling that secret, knowing smile. I ran my thumb over her face. For 45 years, I thought I was the provider. I thought I was the strong one. I thought I was protecting her from the harsh realities of the world. I was so wrong. She was the fortress. She was the general. She saw the storm coming decades before the first drop of rain fell, and she spent her life building an ark so I wouldn't drown. My wife went to the bank every Monday for 45 years to prepare for this day. She didn't save me from poverty. Poverty is just a lack of money, and that is easy to fix. She saved me from something far worse. She saved me from the cruelty of my own flesh and blood. She saved me from the indignity of being discarded. She saved me from becoming a victim. I put the wallet back in my pocket, right next to my heart, and I will live worthy of every single cent she left behind. I turned away from the window and walked out of the conference room. I walked through the quiet hallway, past the paintings of the old men who built this city, and into the elevator. When the doors opened into the lobby, the sunlight poured in through the glass entrance, blinding and warm. I buttoned my jacket. I lifted my chin. I walked across the marble floor, my footsteps echoing with a steady, confident rhythm. I wasn't Henry the burden. I wasn't Henry the victim. I was Henry Caldwell, the steward of Martha's hope. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air was fresh and smelled of spring. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the promise of the future. I walked toward my car, ready for whatever came next, stepping into the light, finally free. Henry's story serves as a sharp reminder that money doesn't change people. It merely reveals who they truly are. Sometimes those we trust the most turn out to be the cruelest, while the quiet sacrifices of those beside us go unnoticed until it is almost too late. Never underestimate the power of silence and patience. More importantly, dignity isn't found in your bank account, but in how you stand up after being betrayed. It is never too late to reclaim your life, set firm boundaries, and teach ungrateful family members the hard, necessary lesson of standing on their own 2 feet. What do you think about Henry's revenge? Was he too harsh on his own flesh and blood? Or was this the expensive lesson they desperately needed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe right now so you never miss the next emotional life story.